Okay, yeah, so we are all here today to learn a bit about user experience for hackers, why it matters, and what we all maybe can do. This talk is brought to us by Mamata, who is a Qubes OS developer, who also yells at hackers to tell them to be better and care about their users a bit more. How about a warm round of applause for her? And yeah.
All right, welcome. As you see from the name of the talk, I want to talk about UX for hackers, why it matters, what can you, all the brilliant, amazing people here in this room can do. A couple of sentences about myself. I'm the UX lead and developer at Qubes OS, which is a reasonably secure operating system. I'm a lab psychologist. That is, I studied, I did some training, and then I decided that talking to people and not being able to tell them what to do is a very difficult job. So I turned to become a programmer and a hacker. And I translate between hackers and humans. I am a UX designer, but I am not an artist. I do not draw beautiful pictures, as anybody who has seen me play Pictionary can attest. I cannot solve all the problems. I want to share with you my experiences in trying to make things more approachable for humans and for other hackers. UX is a loaded word in many hacker spaces. One of the conversations I had with members of my own project was somebody came to me and be like, Marta, but does Qubes need usability? People can figure it out if they want to use it. It's for the people who think about it, right? No, because UX is not really about making things look pretty. Well, mostly. Like, we are humans, we like to look at pretty things. As you can see all around, there's a lot of things that are just pretty because that makes people happy. And it's also nice when our programs are pretty. That makes people happy. UX is also not about adding random whitespace to things, despite what sometimes hackers think. It's not adding pointless additional work just because somebody from the marketing department told the hacker that they have to do it. UX is about making things work well for the actual people who are using the things we are making. This is the whole idea. We want to make things work for the people who are using them. It doesn't always mean make things super easy and no thinking and no problem and just use it. You know, if you have, I don't know, power tools, they're not the easiest thing to use, but they're very powerful. They still have UX. They still should work well for the people who use them. You know, eliminate the amount of times you cut your own leg off with your power tools or something like that. It doesn't always mean that good UX is just easy, simple, not powerful. It also means things should work according to the expectations the users have. They should work reliably. If you do the same thing, you probably should get the same result. That's the ideal situation. Good UX is making things understandable for the people who are actually using them. And those are the things that every single one of us who makes things can and should think about in making them. Because bad UX is when things are bad to use. And those things, this is not just simply bad interface. If you want to read one book about designing UXs, read this one. This is called The Design of Everyday Things. It's not really about computers, but it will teach you more than any other book about design. And as you can see on the cover, there is the worst possible design of a teacup, or tea kettle, whatever you call this, a thing in English. You cannot really pour anything from it. It won't work. It may just look nice. Another example of a bad UX, bad design of the thing designed to be used, a couple of years ago, like in 2015, there was a contest of Miss Universe happening somewhere in the US. And a tiny, small Well, the problem was that the announcer announced the wrong winner. Awkward. Why? Well, because the card that they've gotten was designed in a terrible, terrible way. If you look at this card, the actual winner is just below the big Miss Universe 2015 title. But in the first place, a person would read on the left, on top left, there is the second runner-up. And the poor guy who was doing the announcing just read the first thing that he saw at the card, which was the second runner-up, which was unpleasant for everybody involved. And this is just an example of bad design, of bad UX, of a thing that's supposed to be used. Another, a bit more relevant to our areas of expertise, bad UXs, are the bad security UXs, or like the bad, very simple UXs. Look, the door that says, don't pull, push only. You should do one of those things, I'm sure. The idea behind this door was just to pull, but the way it's written means that they could have just as well not put in the placard on it. It just makes it more confusing. And the other thing that happens very often with things with bad UX made by hackers, they're so annoying to use that their actual users end up doing things like, oh, this is the code to the door. Just put it on the door. This is the problem of the yellow sticky note with the password then that terrible person in marketing puts on their screen. The UX of using the computer is so annoying that they're just taking a shortcut. And this is on us. This is on people who are making those systems, because people are kind of lazy. But we will get back to it in a second. And another example of very bad UX, the password problem. This is a strongly abbreviated, very old joke about how people are trying to enter a new password, and the new password requirements appear with every password that you are trying to put the enter new password. Roses, too few characters, pretty roses. Sorry, you must use at least one numerical characters, one pretty rose, no spaces. At least 10 different characters. Oh, and that password has already been used. This is bad UX. This will not make people use better passwords. This will just make people develop annoying workarounds or just use the sticky notes with the password. Why does it all matter for us, for hackers? Despite what we like to think, we are human. We are all human beings with human brains. Those humans make mistakes. We make mistakes. We are often bad at using our own tools. And of course you can say, well, just get better. Just don't make mistakes. That's not, it has never in history of humanity really worked for anybody. We need to make our tools in a way that make it harder to make mistakes. There are those classical examples of tools that make it super easy to shoot your own foot off. The rm-rf dot space slash that will remove a bit more than you probably thought you are removing. Or the other thing that actually hurt me recently. Apparently, if you do in a Linux cat file redirect to the same file, well, the contents of the file are gone. And I did not get a warning. This is all UX. It's not about a nice, shiny external interface. This is also about how we make our command line tools to make it a bit harder to hurt ourselves. And also we need to remember that the user is also part of the attack surface. We can make things truly amazingly secure. We can rewrite everything in Rust, and no memory errors will ever occur. Great. But if you can easily trick the user into making something stupid using your own program, it's still not secure. It doesn't matter whose fault it is at the end. If the person should have just been more attentive, if we ended up in trouble. There is a good example of a plane crash, Air Inter Flight 148 crash a couple of years ago, when the whole problem that led to the crash, that led to actual death of actual human beings, was that the great flight assist system could operate in two modes. In one mode, you are supposed to enter the angle of descent, as for example, if you wanted 3.3%, you entered it as 3.3, and in another mode, you entered it as 33. And the pilot got confused, because those two modes were very similar. They were just differing with 3 small letters. And yes, we can say the pilot should have not made this mistake. But at the end, if he did, people died, and it's partially the fault of the people who developed the system. Because sometimes the users of our system are tired, are angry. They have been working for far too long. Their partner is divorcing them. They cannot focus as well as we would like them to focus on using our tools perfectly. We have to account for those problems. Assuming people never make mistakes is how you crash a space rocket, which every space agency in the world will tell you, because brains are not machines, and even if they were machines, we all work with machines. We know how reliable and perfect and flawless those are. And there's another reason. If you need more reasons to convince yourself, or maybe other people, why good UX matters for hackers, it is good for us all where secure tools are more popular. Because if there is just this perfect secure communication method that's just used by a few nerds, well, using it makes you a target if you are unlucky enough to become an object of interest for some sort of agent, state agent, some sort of opponent. It's much harder to target a secure solution if it's used by hundreds, thousands, millions of people. And our secure solutions will not be used if they are not comfortable to use. Tor project. Tor browser is very easy to use. This is why so many people use it, because the default Tor browser can be installed and used by a person who has very little secure knowledge. And that allows a lot of people to hide in the crowd, to hide in the whole group of users. It's harder to enact bans on secure and private communication technologies when they are widespread. I'm not saying that it's impossible. Of course, it's possible, and we see it all the time. But it's harder. It's not as easy to ban something if it's used by more people than just the members of the CCC. And there is one other reason. Why do we make things? Of course, sometimes we just make things because it's fun, because it's interesting, because it tickles our brains in the best way. But sometimes our fun and interesting technical things can make the world a bit better. And to help them make the world a bit better, it's important to make them accessible and usable for people. My own story is that I'm working on Qubes OS. And Qubes OS, secure operating system, based on putting everything into virtual machines. It separates everything possible, some impossible things, into virtual machine. You have a virtual machine for network, you have a virtual machine for firewall, you have a virtual machine for your USB controller. Everything's separated. Very fun, very powerful, not so pleasant to use, but very powerful. And the thing that happened to us when working on Qubes is that it turns out that it's not just a great machine for hackers who like to mess with it. It turned out to be a great machine for journalists. Why? Because a journalist is a person who sometimes receives things from their sources. And sometimes those things are very helpful. And sometimes those things are, I don't know, a PDF that sends to CIA information that it has been opened by whom and when and where. Turns out that using Qubes, which allows you for much more of separation of context, for much more isolation, allows journalists to work in a much more secure way. But it's not that easy to use. And one of the things we started working on a couple of years ago is to make it actually accessible, because it turns out it can be more than just this beautiful hacker toy, than just this beautiful thing for people with extreme interest and devotion to technology. Okay, so those are the reasons why we should all care about UX. At least I hope I convinced you a bit. The problem is the UX that we do often sucks. Anybody who has used Linux knows that a lot of things suck, are not pleasant to use. And there are reasons why they are not unpleasant to use. One thing is that it's very difficult to make a tool and think about a person who has never used a tool. If you are making it, you are so intimately familiar with everything. This is so known to you. It's difficult to take a step back and look at it with fresh eyes to remember how it was being a beginner. And also the problem is, we are very unfamiliar with how other people live and how other people think. There is, of course, an XKCD for that, as always. This is the XKCD that says that even when they're trying to compensate for it, experts in anything wildly overestimate the average person's familiarity with their field. Experts assume that average people are far, far better informed about, for example, security than they actually are. Which means that we tend to be like, yes, well, it is easy to use. Just open the terminal, do those 3 things. It's trivial. Anybody can do it. Because how hard it is. Who doesn't open the terminal at least once per day, right? Another reason is that we are not the nicest environment for people who are good at UX design and maybe not as good at programming. We have a bit of a culture problem. It's not as visible here at the CCC, but I have often seen in many repositories, in many discussions, people being like, okay, this designer proposed those things, but if they can't code them, what's the use of this person? Or real hackers don't need things to be useful, to be usable. There should be hard, there should be difficult. I'm a big macho hacker. I code by waving a magnet over my hard drive. I do not need it to be simple. It is a bit of a cultural problem. And sometimes it's okay to say, it's good when things are comfortable to use. We do not need to constantly prove to ourselves we are great. We are so good at computers. We can have some comfort too. It's okay. It doesn't make us less valuable, less competent. And of course, making good UX is not easy. It's a skill. It's a skill like any other. It's a difficult skill. It needs practice. It needs knowledge. It's not that, okay, I have used programs. I know how to make good UX. No. It's like saying, okay, I have used some encrypted communication. I can implement my own encryption algorithm. Simple, it's the same thing. Will work perfectly, no problem. It is a skill that you have to learn. And for very many hackers, making some sort of interface to interface with humans is the afterthought to the fun and interesting and challenging code parts. And of course, there is one big problem. User research, to which I'll come in a moment, is difficult, time-consuming, and it involves talking to people. And many of us don't really like that part. We would rather talk to other hackers or to computers. OK, so I want to get to telling you a bit of how you can improve the UX of things you are using or making. And I want to come back to the what is bad UX? What are things that are not usable? It is generally things that are difficult to understand for the users that should be using it. If you have to read 100 pages of documentation before you use something, probably it doesn't have very good UX. But also bad UX is when things are accident-prone, when they are inconsistent, when they are too complicated for the purpose that they serve, when they make common things that people want to do very complicated. And I want to tell you a bit about my own bad UX. I will try to avoid in this talk giving you examples of UX made by other projects, because one, I don't think it's very polite, and two, I have a lot of bad examples from my own work, so it's better to make fun of myself. So as I've said, Qubes OS is pretty complicated. This is its configuration settings, the global configuration of the system. And the thing is, at the start, years ago. It was just this small window with a bunch of options. Not very easy to use, but a small. But then it kept growing. Additional people were like, oh, I have a feature. We need a more additional configuration option. Let's just add it to the window. You know, add more drop-downs. The reactor can take it. More drop-downs, more drop-downs. And at some point, you get settings that are really difficult to use also for hackers, also for experts, because you need to spend a lot of time just to find the thing you're looking for. There is a lot of them. Yes, if you are a very good, very experienced Qubes user, it's probably super easy to you. But it takes time to get to this point. Another thing that we had, Qubes puts things into those virtual machines. We call them Qubes, the word game, because and you have to create those cubes. And the initial window to create those was also like, it assumed you already knew everything. It must be easy, right? We know how to make it. Just use the options. It's easy. Any new user had to go to the documentation and be like, what the hell do those options mean? What does persistent home volatile root mean? What is the point here? And yet another thing, my favorite, Qubes also allows you to separate the USB devices that you use from each other, from different VMs. Wonderful. But sometimes you do have to actually use them. So we have this useful, comfortable widget that allows you to connect a certain device to a certain virtual machine. Nice, easy, pleasant, comfortable. The thing is, for example, here you can see a single device appears as one USB stick appears 3 times. Why? Well, because in the underlying Linux system, this device does appear multiple times. There are different partitions. There is the whole device by itself. Well, the user will figure it out how to use it, right? Well, it turns out no. I did a survey among the actual Qubes developers. How many of you always succeed at the first try to connect the correct device that you wanted to use? And like one guy does. So that's a success. And the rest of us are like, I sometimes make mistakes, but it's okay. It's my fault. Well, yes, but I would like you not to have to make those mistakes. I would like to make it a bit easier. I want to tell you now about some UX techniques that can make it a bit more easy for you to do good UX. In a perfect world, of course, we would all have a great open society. We would collaborate with skilled designers. We would have endless funding all the time. It would be great. But in the meantime, before we get to the perfect world, the first thing you should do, you have to know the people who are using your software. And you have to actually try to learn about them. Not what you think they are. You have to ask actual people. Because coming back to that XKCD, we tend to have wildly different ideas about our users from how they actually are. In order to convince some of my colleagues to do some things differently, I've run a survey of actual Qubes users, of people who actually are using the system, downloading it, so on. And I asked them if they wanted to configure the system just using the command line tools, or do they prefer graphical tools? And surprisingly, 27% of the users said, yeah, I actually prefer graphical tools. Most of those people would never admit that to me if we were talking face to face, because it does feel like, yeah, we are hackers. We use the command line. But sometimes you discover that people are not how you think they are. You need to talk to them to learn that, or you need to ask them in many questions. How to know your users? Talking with people is great. It is amazing. Reach out to people you want to use your stuff. Talk to them at conferences. Talk to them online. Try to reach out to them. There is no one tool that will solve everything for you. You can ask your friends. If you think your friends are people who should be using things that you are doing, talk to them, bother them. Ask them how they think about the tools you're using. Ask them, tell me the one thing that really annoyed you in this program. Bigger tools, like surveys, are also very helpful, but you have to be a bit cautious. There's a very easy way to fuck up making a survey. And the whole psychology that I originally come from, we have this problem that we make a lot of surveys, and we only ask, mostly ask American college students about things. So the model human is an American college student, and as you can imagine, that sometimes causes some interesting problems with thinking about how humans actually are. And so, be cautious. Like, if you're only asking people, like if you put your survey on your GitHub page, maybe only the kind of people who will go to your GitHub and read it will reach that survey. You also have to be a kind of careful about how you do your surveys. This is a very beautiful example of a typical terrible question. Is Linux powerful and easy to use? Yes or no? Pick one. You are not allowed to do anything else. This is a so-called double-barreled question. And it's very easy to ask those because we have certain ideas of the questions we want to ask. Whenever you want to do a survey, write it, and then before you send it to other people, have somebody else read it, preferably somebody who is not working with you directly, so they can be like, I do not get this question, what the hell? Or like, I hate this question, please fix it. We can make a lot of assumptions. Again, have somebody else read your surveys. It's easy to ask loaded questions. This is the prototypical psychology example. What will happen if you ask people, have you stopped beating your children? That's not a good question to ask. If you want to ask people about using your software, maybe don't ask them, how much do you like my software? Maybe they're not using it, or maybe they stopped using it, maybe they hate it. Don't ask them, what was the thing that worked best for you? Maybe nothing. Have somebody read your questions. Have somebody help you with phrasing them in a way that's helpful for others. And remember that different people have very different needs. It's okay not to make something for everyone. It's okay not to make something that will work for absolutely every person in the world. But it can be very rewarding when we change our tools so that they work for more people than just us. Thank you. And there is a tool that, in my experience, not very many hackers use, but I find it very helpful to keep yourself focused on doing things for users. The magical UX people call it user personas, which is imaginary users that are based on real people that you have met, they have talked to, you have surveyed. It's easier to think, okay, I'm doing this change. How will Alice, my imaginary user, use it than just thinking, okay, I had 1,000 users surveyed and 225 of them said that they needed this feature. We are humans, we thrive on stories. It's easier to think about making things usable for Alice than it's just thinking about pure data. For Qubes, we have made a couple of personas. They are completely made up. Those people don't exist. But whenever I'm thinking about, okay, what should we do now? What should we focus on? I come back to those personas that describe to me, okay, this person, let's say she's a freelance software developer and hacker. She lives in Berlin. She has those needs. She has those frustrations. That's her setup. She's based on actual people. She's an aggregate of actual people. But I find it much easier to think about her than about all the data that I've gathered. And I have another guy, an investigative journalist. So I think about him also when thinking about new features. Second thing you need to know the task. I know, we all know our task very well. But sometimes it's very easy to lose the sight of the forest with all the beautiful trees that you want to optimize and fix and prune. Think about the happy path you are building your tool for. The happy path, or called golden path, is the ideal situation. How do you want to go through the thing, get the thing done, everything went well. This is an important thing that should work well. This is one of the most important things for most users. The good path, the typical thing, should be pleasant and as simple as possible. with some caveats, but that about a second. You also, of course, need to think about errors. What should we do if there are errors, edge cases, problems, and so on. But also try to think about the good thing, the normal, typical way of using it. It's easy to just get lost in edge cases. Think about the goals, the values of the thing you're doing. OK, security is important for me. What can I sacrifice for security? Privacy is important. Which things will we sacrifice because privacy, which things we shouldn't sacrifice because of privacy? Sometimes you may end up with the decision that harder is better, but it should be a conscious decision. I like an example for that in Qubes. So as I've said, loads and loads of virtual machines. When you are copying and pasting things in normal Linux, Windows, whatever, select something, Control-C, text is in clipboard, Control-V, text is in a new place. Great. As most of you probably know, clipboard is evil. There are so many interesting exploits, problems, hacks, terrible things. That's why we make it a bit harder. If you want to move things from one virtual machine to another, we introduce a bit of a stepping stone. And this could sound like contradiction. You said make things easy. No, I said make your goals in mind. And my goal is to keep users secure and maybe discourage them from copying and pasting completely willy-nilly across all virtual machines, because this may be dangerous for them. Thus, we introduce another step. When you copy things, they land in the local clipboard. Then you do a special, by default, Control-Shift-C shortcut to put them in the global clipboard, Qubes clipboard, and only then paste them to the target virtual machine. And that's another step. It makes the user think. And that was a decision that we made consciously, being like, OK, the ideal situation is the user doesn't really copy and paste very much between virtual machines. They are separate environments for a reason. If they do, we want them to have to stop for a second and think, do I actually want to do it? This should not be an automatic thing. This should make users think for a second. But on the other hand, it cannot be as annoying as to make people be like, oh, screw it, I just don't want to use it. Thus, adding additional shortcut. It's, of course, not perfect. People can get used to it. For some people, it becomes so automatic as the default copying and pasting. But it does protect you a bit. It forces you a bit to think. It needs additional support from UX, from the system. There are additional security safeguards, and so on and so on. But the idea was, we had this task. We thought about the ideal situation. And we tried to have the way we interact with the system support this ideal situation. What else should we watch for when making our UXs? Whenever you encounter your users making errors, ask yourself, were there slips or were there mistakes? Mistake is when a person has the wrong idea, like our favorite nuclear engineer. Everything's going well. Everything is fine. The tests are proceeding correctly. The problem was that he misunderstood the situation. A slip is a wrong action. I actually wanted to press Q, but I pressed W because it's close on the keyboard. If you see that your users are constantly making a certain error, if it's a slip, if they wanted to do the right thing, but they clicked the wrong thing or wrote the wrong thing, think about improving the interface. But if it's a mistake, if they had the wrong idea about what to do, try to improve how you communicate ideas to them. Because this is something that can't really be fixed with just moving buttons around and placing things further apart, usually. And also you have to think about how human memory and attention work. Humans have limited working memory. It's terrible, but that's how it works. We are very easy to distract. We only notice things we care about. Psychologists like to call it inattentional blindness. And there is a beautiful experiment about it. I will not have you participate in it because it would take a bit too much time. But the whole point is, it's called Invisible Gorilla. You show your viewers a film of people playing ball, throwing ball to each other, and tell them, count how many times they're passing the ball. So they watch the film and they say, OK, 27, cool. Did you notice the man in the gorilla suit walking in the middle? Turns out most people won't notice the man in the gorilla suit. They were counting how many times the ball was passed. They were ignoring the gorilla. We do not notice the things we do not care about. And we try to automate the things we do often so we don't have to think about them. Usually people care about achieving the goal, not using the software well. It's not like our goal for most people, the goal is not do the computer thing well, is to use the computer thing to get to what you actually want. And that means people will do shortcuts. You have to be conscious about that. If you're doing anything that's secure, remember, humans will do shortcuts. Humans will not read long warning messages, just say yes very often without reading the question. They will only read the one paragraph in the documentation that looks relevant to their problem. They will ignore the big above it. The big sign says, caution, this is dangerous, don't do that. It was not the paragraph that looked appropriate. So you have to think about it. When you're making documentation, think about your documentation from the perspective of a person who wants to solve one problem and will probably read just one paragraph that looks relevant. People will find shortcuts, and we can blame them for it, or we can work with them. Now, the only screenshot from another program, but I had to do it. This is something that happens in LibreOffice when you are trying to open a file that's already open somewhere. There is a lot of text here. And most people, when they see it, this is what they see. Words, blah, blah, whatever. I want to do the thing. Which is the button that will make me do the thing? This button looks like the open read-only. OK, there's open there. I'm doing it. And then they will be very surprised that they cannot edit the file. We cannot assume that people will read all the beautiful words we craft. I'm sorry. People like shortcuts. So sometimes we have to think about working around this. You cannot just be like, OK, this is a long explanation. Everybody will read it. Everything will be fine. Probably not. Try to look for a shorter way to put it. Another thing that we have to keep in mind, consistency. Things need to be consistent. Inconsistency is distracting, it's confusing, it uses our brain power. Yes, most humans can figure things out if they are inconsistent, but people don't like doing it. If in one window the OK button is on the right and in another is on the left, people will hate using it because it's just a thing you have to think about, and that's the worst. And that's why, and I hate to tell this to you because we like innovation, stop reinventing the wheel. If you're making an interface for something, look at other similar things and do it like that. Don't try to be the innovator in the world of interfaces, because unfortunately, even if you are right, a lot of people will just be like, oh God, no, new thing, I do not want to learn it. I want to send my email fast and not in 10 days. Some people will love it. But for a great deal of people, this is going to be a huge problem. So now I want to say how I used all those principles in improving my own bad UX. As I've said, those global settings, 1 billion of drop-downs, no explanations, you'll manage. So that we turned into a thing that has actual explanations. And that's something that was quite painful. Some of my coworkers complained about it, being like, oh God, there is so much stuff here, there's so many words. But what I've told you, people only look at the thing that concerns them, that looks interesting to them. It's not, most users will not read everything anyway, but they may read the one thing that looks like the thing they are needing. And having some explanation in the interface is very helpful for people. Instead of, for the clipboard thing, it's complicated. So in the setting, it's also described somewhere. It's described in multiple places. Because why? Because users will not be very happy about remembering things. They're just focusing on their goals. Maybe if we repeat it multiple times, they will remember it. This thing, when you are creating a new cube, oh, sorry, too much clicks. When you are creating a new cube, again, I added more explanations. And I also did add the white space. I know that we are very afraid of white space. I often hear complaints being like, oh no, this RSS reader, this email client added more white space, how terrible. But again, we are also people. White space allows us to more easily find things that we are looking for. It allows to be like, okay, those things close to each other, probably one thing connected, okay. Then I can go to another group of things if I'm looking for something. White space is not actually very bad. And for the devices thing, a lot of tiny things close to each other. Well, again, I added more explanations. Because this is the thing. Things need to be described. Things need to be explained. Because some people will manage very well with no explanations, but most people will not. For most people, this is going to be very complicated. Again, if you want to improve the way you are doing things, if you care about people for whom you are doing things, first, know them, learn about them, talk to them, ask them questions. Second, know the tasks that you want your tools to help them perform. Make the good things simple, make the bad things hard, make the things that people will do anyway as secure and safe and good for the user as possible. And for the love of God, please stop reinventing the wheel and do the interfaces like other people do. It will make life of many people much easier. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I think a lot of things were said that we should all remember. We have a lot of time for Q&A. So first of all, I sadly forgot to mention it. We have a Signal Angel here monitoring the Fediverse hashtag 38C3 YEL, as well as the IRC 83C3 whole YEL room on hackin.org. Has anyone asked any questions there?
No, not yet.
Okay, but I see one question in the room.
I'm all right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Anki. Great talk. I have a horror story for all of you. I work for a large original equipment manufacturer whose product is a large and beautiful piece of machinery that needs to be remote controlled. So they have a variety of softwares that they build. They do no design. They have a broken system where people from different parts of the company can put in their requirements, but they do no design. So I'm a bit of a designer. I came in there, but these are all powerful men. So me, no chance. So my first part of the question is, do you have, or anybody in the room, any words of wisdom? Because these managers have never heard of design. They think, the actual development is done by an outside company. So nobody tells them that design exists. My second part, that a little bit gives you a little bit more hope. With my skills, I've basically now gone into process design, which they also don't do, but nobody does. So I'm now using UX design principles to design processes. I've done my first design sprint this November. So actually, well, it was my third design sprint, so I was already, I felt okay, but it was my first one actually in operations. So yeah, very proud of that.
Congratulations, first things first, and thank you for your great work. And so, to be honest, I do have a way of trying to convince the very brilliant hackers I work with that the things I do make sense, and it's basically with nerd violence. What is nerd violence? They're like, do we actually need design? I'm like, oh, please. So I'm a psychologist by training, and let me tell you all about the human brain and the cognitive psychology. And those are the list of citations from various papers that say that, for example, humans do have limited attention span. I don't think anybody has ever actually looked into those papers because it just looks very scary. But it turns out that when you reframe it as saying, oh, design, when people hear design, they think like, pretty things, not important. But when they say here cognitive psychology of the user, it sounds much more serious, except it's the same thing, of course. Like, yes, cognitive psychology of the user is why we do design, because users, humans, brains. So I do like to rephrase, to not use the ugly word design, because it's for many people associated with the soft, useless skills. I like to talk about the cognitive aspect of being like, oh, but you have to do it for the human brain. You have to remember. Also, you can, like in the commercial context, you can say, okay, but errors cost money. Make it in a way that people make less errors, because errors are costly.
Yeah,
Uh, Hello. So your first example was the RM command. So if I was like travel back in time 40 years and I would be the person to create that command, should I disallow removing the root, or what's the solution for cases like this where it's an API and then you interface at the same time?
I think what I would do, so I think it's impossible to think about all those problems. But this particular problem is a thing that happens, like the people putting a space between a dot and a slash. So what I would probably do was try to figure out what are the typical problems, okay, and warn user, or maybe require an additional option, but probably not, because people will just put it everywhere, like we put -f everywhere with RM, not thinking about it. Maybe I would probably ask a user, are you sure this looks like a different command? This looks like a normal different command when it's just a dot slash without a space. Are you absolutely sure you know what you're doing? So that's what I would probably not disallow it completely, because, you know, it is also a power tool. It's like, you know, an electric chainsaw, something like that. It has to be powerful. But electric chainsaws have some guardrails that make it more difficult for you to cut off your leg. So I would try to put those there.
So I have a comment on that. That's actually a solved problem in Unix. You cannot delete the directory that you are in.
Yes.
And so it's very simple.
Yeah, yes, you are correct. It is solved. I just give it as an example because it's the sort of thing that everybody talks about with using a RAM, that you have to be very cautious about where you put your spaces. But you are completely right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I already try to implement my software very user-friendly, including my code, because I like my code to be used by me. But something I have noticed is that people also enjoy getting better at things and a very high skill ceiling, such that I have a friend who is proud of himself using the browser only from the command line or something like that. This seems to be very difficult for me, at least as a single person who has no designer training, to design a software not just to be used by a user or by myself or by an untrained person, but by a person that learns with my software to get better and better and stop using the GUI.
So I would say one of the best things you can do for this is take a friend, or maybe somebody, a stranger that wants to work with you, but at the start, friends work well. Give them your software and tell them, okay, I want to learn how people use it. Could you try using it? Could you show me how you are learning it? And I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to watch. This is very hard, I know, because we are very tempted to be like, oh, no, you're clicking it wrong. I'll show you. I'll show you what to do. No, just let them make their own mistakes and watch them. Make it very clear to them that this is a thing, that this is a favor that they're doing for you. You are not making fun of them making mistakes. Quite the opposite. You are learning from those mistakes, and this is the best things they can do for you. And try to watch how another person learns to use your software. It's truly one of the most educational experiences you can have as somebody who makes programs.
I was coming at it more from the perspective of if I do the super easy user interface and the power user comes along, then it's in their way. If I do the power user interface, then the super easy user has no idea what's happening.
I mean, you can try, some tools have both. Some tools have both command line interface and powerful and simple GUI interface. Sometimes you can hide some options or like expose them only in certain situations. There is no simple solution, but having the powerful tools available, people who will want to learn about it will probably use those powerful variants of those tools.
So a question from the web. Thanks for your talk. Are there ways to create a design so that humans are willing to learn and read instead of just click?
You have to find, that depends on what the thing is for. So the problem is not really with the design. The problem is with why people are using it. If you're telling people, okay, this software will help you fill out your taxes, most people do not want to spend a second more on this task than they need to. So they will not want to learn. If you have a way to tell people, okay, this software, when you learn it, will make your life better, this is interesting, this can work. But this is not really about how the software looks. It's about what it does and why people use it. For certain things, most people who are not hackers, that is people who just like to take things apart and put them together for fun, most people would just want them to work. This is the problem with computers. Like most people would just want them to work and not spend too much time on it. Because what I said earlier, people are goal-oriented. They have a certain goal. And if you want the goal to be learn the software, you have to ask yourself, why would people do that? What is the reward in it for them? And if you tell them, okay, you will be able to do those powerful things, those interesting things, that can work. But for a great deal of human beings, learning a software for the fun of it is not actually that interesting. And I know this is not typical here, but what can I say? Humans are very different.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for your talk. I'm over here. Whatever. You showed some interfaces with images where the explanations for the functions were actually on the interface itself.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think about some question mark buttons or something like this, where the user has the possibility to click them if he's unsure about what this function actually does?
So there are two problems with it. One, the amazing ability of humans to ignore the buttons. This is one of the things I'm probably going to be changing in those interfaces, because the amount of users I talk to were like, wow, there are some icons with question marks. I have not noticed those. There are actually, and a lot of people don't notice those. So humans often don't notice such things. And the other thing is accessibility. For a lot of people, having to click on something is quite inaccessible because, for example, they just prefer to use keyboard. They use a screen reader, things like that. So this is something that has to be very, very thoroughly tested. It can work, but it is difficult to make it easy to find. That's one of the reasons why, for example, Windows used to have this button like on every screen, question mark. It's moving away from it because people didn't use it. People didn't find it. It was too hidden. So I have mixed feelings on those.
Short point to the question marks from me over here.
Mm-hmm.
It's even worse if they aren't filled, because even the programmer didn't find them. And I just spent some time looking at question marks because there was nothing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes, sometimes even programmers don't find them. So good idea, turns out that not that great in practice.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So I have a question regarding the big topic of accessibility, because that is very much linked to user experience. And the question I have: do you have any word of wisdom or any advice on how to approach that? Because sometimes accessibility constraints kind of contradict the needs and wants of users who are not that dependent on further accessibility. I would say typical users like stuff to be a little bit responsive and moving and sometimes a little bit fancy, but the same thing can be very hard for people with, for instance, visual impairments.
Yes, this is a super difficult problem. The way I am approaching it, I try to make to have. Okay, so first things first. The most important thing for me in making things accessible was going and talking to people who need accessible things and learning what they actually need. And I was really surprised by it, because it turns out that I'm not as smart as I thought I was. And turns out that, for example, one of the things that was absolutely crucial for for a large group of visually impaired people was to make it easy to have the programs react to system settings saying things need to be humongous. So I need to have my program react correctly to whatever desktop environment setting is that says use a ginormous font. Because yes, some people do use things where you have like a font that's 40 pixels in size. It has to be it has to work well with those needs. So my first thing is always ask what people actually need and not assume what people actually need, because yeah, assumptions don't work that well. Another thing is, unfortunately, sometimes needs of different groups of people collide. And you sometimes end up making decisions whether to make things better for this group of people or that group of people. And I think we should make those choices knowing what we are doing. But in terms of accessibility, sometimes, adding additional options that, for example, turn off the animations if you have something very animated, can turn out to be very beneficial for everybody, not just for people with visual impairments. Maybe there are people who are using the stuff you make on a very slow computer. So sometimes it pays to think about accessibility not as a limitation and things that makes things worse. Just treat it as another constraint. Like if you're writing poems, it's sometimes good to make them to be forced to make things rhyme. You get better art if you have some constraints. And with design, same. Don't think about it. It makes things worse. Try to see how this can benefit everybody.
Hi.
I think it's me.
Oh.
I'm going first. Hi, I'm Silke, also a fellow product designer. Really enjoyed your talk. I can also code. That helps me a lot. But I assume you too. I have a very small, detailed, nitty-picky question to you, because I've also, in a lot of software, encountered this one thing. If you go 2 steps back, I think, on your screen, you had that screen that said, OK. Exactly that one. It says,
this one.
OK, cancel, apply. And always, as a user, I'm asking myself, why is there OK and apply on the same screen? So will OK now save everything, or will only apply do it? And what happens if I press OK?
Oh, this is actually a very good question, because it comes from what are our expectations of the systems that we use. Why there is a separate OK and apply? Because there is an idea in many Linux-based systems that you can do apply, which doesn't close the window but saves the settings, and OK, which closes the window and saves the settings. And this is a good point. Like, I tried to imitate other tools that we have in the default Qubes installation so that it looks the same as other tools, basically. But I think this is a very good point, like thinking about what those words mean can be not very obvious.
Hi. Thank you for your talk. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for your talk. I think I tried to ask you if you did an UI safety analysis, like they do it in atomic reactors, like this interfaces and so forth, because Qubes OS is kind of a safety critical things, which, yeah. And second question is, did you try or did you think towards visual configurations, like when you think about the blueprint kind of way of connecting dots, like in the Unreal engine, where you can, yeah, or Unity engine? I think this would also kind of mitigate some safety problems and mitigate errors, kind of. And maybe to the first question, just a comment. It was about, yeah, how can I convince my bosses and so forth. From my experience, if they are Europeans and over 50, don't try it. Just do it. The second thing what I would recommend is just OAuth, so just understand their background, where they come from, because sometimes this helps you to approach them better in a more informed way. Thank you.
Okay, so answering your question, yes, I would really love to have visual representations of the configuration, and so that unfortunately comes back to the infinite amount of money, time, and people to implement it. But I would really like to have it, and hopefully at some point I will. That would be lovely. And about security, UI security audits, not as a separate procedure, but yes, as a continuous testing of the issue. If you want to talk more about, because probably I should stop at some point, so if you want to talk more with me about it, I'm usually around the Qubes assembly, which is findable at the navigation app. So, and I would love to continue conversations about it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another big round of applause, please. And yeah.